Chosen one. If you're here right now, this wasn't an accident. Stop everything you're doing. Don't scroll. Don't multitask. I need your full attention. This isn't casual content. This is a message you were meant to hear. You did something recently. A quiet moment. No witnesses. No validation. But heaven recorded it. Because this wasn't just temptation. This was the final temptation. And it caught the attention of something much darker. The devil made one last attempt. And it failed. Stay until the end because I'll show you exactly what that moment was. Why that temptation was allowed. And what's being released for you now because you didn't bend. Subscribe and turn on notifications. And write 777 inches the comments if you felt a shift but couldn't explain why. Most people don't fail because they're evil. They fail because they're tired. Most people, when pushed to the edge, don't choose what's right. They choose what makes the pain stop. They get angry and strike back. They justify revenge because it's fair. They withdraw and go cold, telling themselves they're protecting their heart. They numb themselves with distractions, habits, or silence. They compromise just a little because it promises relief. They tell themselves, just this once, and that's understandable. Because when you've been tested again and again, when you've already done the right thing so many times without reward, when nobody is clapping, nobody is watching, nobody is coming to save you, exhaustion becomes the most dangerous doorway. This is how most people are taken out. Not through obvious evil, not through dramatic downfall, but through quiet permission. They don't wake up planning to fall. They simply stop resisting. They say things like, I've earned this. No one would blame me. It won't matter. I'll fix it later. And in that moment, something ancient leans in closer. Because the final temptation is never loud. It doesn't threaten you. It comforts you. It doesn't ask you to become someone bad. It asks you to stop being who you are. It whispers, rest your values for a moment. Lower your standard just this once. You've already proven enough. Most people accept that whisper. They don't even feel like they're choosing wrong. They feel like they're choosing relief. And that's why it works. This is why entire lives quietly collapse without scandal. This is why potential dies without a fight. This is why so many stories end unfinished. Because the enemy doesn't need you to rebel. He only needs you to bend. And bending looks reasonable when you're exhausted. But very rarely, someone reaches that same edge, feels the same fatigue, faces the same sweet exit, and still doesn't move. No anger, no revenge, no compromise, no numb escape, just restraint, just stillness, just a refusal to surrender identity for comfort. This is where everything separates. This is where destiny stops being theory and becomes record. This is where 99% fail. It wasn't dramatic when it happened. There was no explosion, no announcement, no warning. It was quiet, somewhere between 7 and 14 days ago. Maybe recently, maybe just hours before you found this message. You reached a level of tired that sleep doesn't touch. Not physical tiredness, not the kind a nap fixes. This was exhaustion layered on exhaustion. You were tired of explaining yourself, tired of being the strong one, tired of doing the right thing without results, tired of holding back when everything in you wanted release. And the most dangerous part, you were alone in it. No witnesses, no applause, no one checking in, no one saying, I see you. Whatever you were carrying, you carried it silently. And then the offer came, not loud, not aggressive. It didn't look like evil. It looked like relief. It promised rest. It promised quiet. It promised an end to the tension you'd been holding in your body for too long. It whispered things like, just this once, you've done enough. You don't owe anyone anything anymore. It showed you an exit that felt reasonable. And that's when it became dangerous. Because this wasn't temptation born from ignorance. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't weakness from not knowing better. You knew exactly what was right. You were just tired of paying the price for it. That's what made this different. You weren't tempted because you lacked values. You were tempted because you were exhausted from honoring them. And exhaustion lowers defenses faster than desire ever could. The enemy didn't come to overpower you. He came to wait you out. To see if time, loneliness, and silence could do what force never did. And in that moment, that quiet moment, when no one would have known, when you could have chosen relief and called it survival, Something irreversible hovered in the balance, because that choice wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about identity, and that's when it happened. This wasn't temptation from ignorance. This was temptation from exhaustion. You had every right to give in, after everything you carried, after how long you stayed disciplined when nobody cared, after how unfair it felt to keep choosing restraint while others took shortcuts and walked free. You had every right to say, enough. You could have lashed out and called it honesty. You could have taken what was offered and called it survival. You could have crossed the line quietly and told yourself no one would ever know. No one would have blamed you. If you had reacted, people would have understood. If you had compromised, they would have called it human. If you had chosen yourself at the cost of your values, no one would have questioned it. The world would have justified you. The timing was perfect. The pressure was heavy. The excuse was ready. But you didn't. You didn't reach for revenge. You didn't take the shortcut. You didn't trade integrity for relief. You stopped. You paused in a moment where pausing cost you comfort. You held back when release was right there. You restrained yourself when nobody was watching and nothing was forcing you. You chose restraint over reaction. You chose truth over ease. You chose alignment over relief. And that choice triggered something. Not externally, not immediately, but internally, and far beyond you. Because what happened in that moment wasn't behavior management. It wasn't discipline. It wasn't willpower. It was revelation. That moment stripped away circumstances, fatigue, loneliness, and pressure, and revealed what was underneath all of it. You didn't choose how to act. You revealed who you are. Anyone can do the right thing when they feel strong. Anyone can be moral when they feel supported. Anyone can resist when the reward is visible. But when you are exhausted, when you feel unseen, when relief is offered quietly, and you still refuse to bend, that's not training. That's identity. That's the difference between someone who behaves well sometimes and someone who cannot be negotiated with. Because at that level, temptation stops being a test of desire and becomes a test of essence, and you passed it without witnesses, without applause, without knowing what was at stake. You didn't choose behavior. You revealed identity. The moment you didn't bend, something activated. Not emotionally, not symbolically, systemically. Because when restraint appears at that level, after exhaustion, after isolation, after permission was available, it triggers a response that doesn't belong to the human layer. Hell noticed first, not because you fought back, not because you prayed harder, but because one of their most reliable methods stopped working on you. And that is rare. There are protocols in place for rage. There are systems prepared for rebellion. There are entire divisions designed for people who collapse loudly. But there is a separate alert for something else. Silent refusal. When you didn't react, when you didn't reach, when you didn't take the relief that was offered, an emergency flag was raised. Because exhaustion-based temptation is the final filter. If it fails, there is no leverage left. What you experienced wasn't a normal test. It was a last attempt protocol, designed to see if fatigue could achieve what fear and desire could not. And when it didn't, operations paused, not to applaud you, not to reward you, but to reassess you. Your profile changed. Up until that moment, you were listed as resistant, difficult, but workable, strong, but human. After that moment, the classification shifted, because you demonstrated something hell can't negotiate with. You showed restraint without witnesses, integrity without reward, alignment without pressure. That combination breaks prediction models, and when prediction fails, access is restricted. This wasn't praise. This was reclassification. It meant certain approaches were shut down. Certain doors were closed permanently. Certain manipulations were marked ineffective, not because you're untouchable in general, but because this method no longer applies to you. And that's when the last attempt failed. Not dramatically, not violently, but absolutely. Because the system that was built to bend you ran into something it wasn't designed to handle. Someone who doesn't just resist temptation, but outgrows the need to negotiate with it. And when that happens, hell doesn't rage, it recalculates. After the reclassification, a marker was applied. Not a title meant to flatter you, not a label designed to boost confidence. A functional designation, because once a system identifies a pattern it cannot override, it assigns a seal. Yours was rare. It wasn't based on talent. It wasn't based on discipline. It wasn't based on how many times you resisted before. It was based on when you resisted. You were flagged under what is known as enemy-level forgiveness. That classification is not about mercy. It's about immunity. It applies to individuals who demonstrate restraint after exhaustion, alignment after isolation, and integrity after the reward is removed. This seal is almost never applied, not because people don't want it, but because nearly everyone trades identity for relief before reaching this point. Statistically, less than 1% ever reach the threshold. Less than 0.1% hold it long enough to be recorded, and fewer than 1 in several thousand activate it without external pressure. Because once this seal is placed, interaction rules change. Certain provocations stop landing. Certain temptations lose their emotional pull. Certain attacks return nothing, not because you're protected from struggle, but because struggle no longer negotiates with you the same way. This classification doesn't make you perfect. It makes you non-biddable. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You don't need to explain your restraint. You don't need to justify why you didn't take what was offered. The system already logged it. Once you are classified at this level, access to you changes. Opportunities become filtered. People become sorted. Pressure tests arrive less often but hit deeper. Not to break you, to confirm consistency. Because this designation isn't permanent by belief. It's maintained by alignment. And the reason the final attempt failed wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It wasn't divine favoritism. It failed because the moment you refused to bend, you demonstrated something the opposition cannot simulate. A refusal that doesn't come from fear of consequence. A restraint that doesn't depend on reward. That's why this seal matters. And that's why the next phase doesn't look like resistance anymore. It looks like access being quietly removed from those who once tried to reach you. What most people never realize is that the final attempt rarely comes from the front. It comes from behind the scenes. Because when someone reaches your level of classification, direct pressure becomes inefficient. So the strategy changes. Someone noticed you. Not publicly. Not openly. Someone who had been watching quietly, comparing themselves to you, measuring their stagnation against your restraint. Envy doesn't always look like hatred. Sometimes it looks like interest. Sometimes concern. Sometimes silence. That person didn't confront you. They didn't warn you. They didn't attack directly. They waited. They waited for your exhaustion. They waited for the right emotional window. They waited for the moment when you were most alone. And when that moment came, they initiated one last attempt. Not with force, not with threat, but with access. A conversation that felt familiar. An opportunity that seemed deserved. A door that looked like relief disguised as reward. It was designed perfectly, because it wasn't meant to overpower you. It was meant to make you lower yourself voluntarily. The assumption was simple. Everyone bends eventually. But this time, the calculation failed, because what they didn't know was that the method they relied on had already been marked ineffective. When you didn't take the bait, when you didn't respond the way history said you should, the attempt didn't just fail. It reversed. Not instantly, not dramatically, but structurally. The energy behind it collapsed inward. The leverage they thought they had evaporated. The advantage they were counting on exposed itself. And the consequences didn't land on you. They landed on the source. People involved began losing influence quietly. Plans stalled without explanation. Confidence fractured behind closed doors. Not punishment, exposure. Because the system doesn't retaliate at your level. It removes access. The ones who tried to reach you found themselves unable to touch what they once manipulated. They didn't stop because you fought back. They stopped because there was nothing left to pull. No guilt to activate. No desire to exploit. No exhaustion to weaponize. And that's the most dangerous position you can reach. When someone realizes they can't provoke you, tempt you, or drain you anymore. They retreat. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. Because the final attempt is only attempted when everything else has failed. And now it has. They didn't lose because you attacked them. They lost because you didn't bend. You noticed it, didn't you? Not all at once. Not dramatically. But quietly. Unmistakably. Something changed after that moment. You felt a kind of peace that didn't make sense. Not happiness. Not excitement. Just a calm that arrived without explanation. Like a storm that suddenly stopped arguing with the sky. You also noticed people drifting away, not with conflict, not with closure. They just lost access. Conversations felt shorter, messages slowed down. Some connections dissolved without a fight, and strangely, it didn't hurt the way it used to. Your intuition sharpened, not louder, clearer. You started knowing things before evidence arrived. You felt when to pause, when to move, when to stay silent. You didn't second-guess it as much anymore. You trusted it. Doors began opening faster, not huge miracles, but timing that felt almost surgical. Opportunities appeared without begging. Answers came before questions finished forming. Things aligned without forcing. And the attacks, they didn't stop. They backfired. People who tried to provoke you looked confused when you didn't react. Attempts to drain you left them exposed instead. What once pulled you into emotional loops suddenly fell flat. You may have felt a strange exhaustion after victories. Not burnout. More like the kind of tired that follows completion. As if something heavy finally detached. You might have started noticing numbers, patterns, moments like 333, 1111, repeating sequences that caught your eye without you searching for them. Not because they're magical, but because your awareness shifted. Your dreams became more vivid, not chaotic, more precise. Messages without language, scenes that stayed with you longer than normal. You woke up with clarity instead of confusion. Heavy environments began to calm when you arrived. Rooms felt keener. Tension dissolved without discussion. People around you opened up unexpectedly, or grew uncomfortable without knowing why. You didn't try to change anything. It just happened. You also noticed something subtle but important. The urge to explain yourself weakened. You stopped needing validation, stopped rehearsing arguments in your head, stopped proving why you deserved peace, because peace stopped asking permission. And all of this didn't happen because you won something. It happened because access changed. These aren't coincidences, they're confirmations. Confirmation that the final attempt didn't just fail, it ended a phase. Confirmation that you crossed a threshold most people never notice. Confirmation that what was once negotiable no longer is. And the reason these signs feel familiar is because they aren't new gifts. They're symptoms of alignment, and alignment always leaves a trail. What happens next isn't loud. There's no announcement, no dramatic reversal overnight, because what's been activated isn't a reward. It's an acceleration protocol. Your timeline was moved up, not because you asked for it, not because you were ready in comfort, but because you proved alignment under pressure. And once that happens, the system stops delaying you. In the next 24 hours, you may notice the first confirmation. It will look small, almost dismissively. A message you didn't expect, a delay that suddenly protects you, a conversation that reveals more than intended. That's not coincidence, that's filtration. Within the next 7 days, something else shifts. People who no longer match your frequency will be quietly removed. Not with drama, not with confrontation. They will simply lose relevance. Plans with them will dissolve. Access will close. Paths will separate without explanation. At the same time, doors you didn't knock on will open. Opportunities won't beg for you to chase them. They'll appear aligned, as if waiting for you to stop negotiating with yourself. And here's what matters most. You won't feel rushed. Acceleration doesn't feel like panic. It feels like clarity. You'll know when to say yes. You'll know when to walk away. You'll know when something isn't yours anymore, even if it once was. Before this month ends, you'll notice 3 specific signs. First, decisions become easier. Not because choices disappear, but because confusion does. Second, your energy returns selectively. You won't feel constantly drained. You'll feel focused, stronger after saying no than you ever felt after saying yes. Third, confirmation arrives without explanation. Something you quietly wondered about will be answered, not through logic, but timing. This is the compensation most people misunderstand. It's not money first. It's not recognition first. It's alignment first. And alignment pulls resources naturally, because now nothing is wasted on proving, defending, or surviving. Everything you do from here on carries weight, not because you're special, but because you're no longer divided. The reason the final temptation had to happen was because this phase couldn't begin while you were still negotiable, and now you aren't. That doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes direct. What belongs will approach. What doesn't will fall away. And you won't chase either. This isn't a blessing that arrives someday. It's already in motion. Watch closely over the next few days. Not with anxiety, with awareness, because what you passed unlocked speed. And speed, when paired with restraint, creates momentum nothing can stop. This isn't the end of resistance. It's the end of delay. And from here on, your path doesn't widen. It clears. This is where it closes. Not with emotion, not with motivation, with record. You are no longer someone who sometimes resists temptation. You are someone they cannot negotiate with. That distinction matters, because the moment you passed wasn't symbolic. It wasn't spiritual poetry. It wasn't a lesson for later. It was logged. What you did wasn't interpreted as effort. It was assessed as capacity, not potential, not intention. Capacity under pressure. And that's why there was no applause, no celebration, no visible reward. Because systems don't celebrate when something becomes permanent. They adjust. What you passed wasn't a test of strength. It was a test of irreversibility. You crossed a line where temptation no longer defines direction, where exhaustion no longer dictates choices, where relief no longer overrides alignment. And once that happens, you are no longer handled the same way. This wasn't flattery. This was documented assessment. Your restraint was entered as evidence. Your refusal was marked as final. Your silence was recorded as authority. From this point forward, life won't argue with you the way it used to. You won't feel pulled in 10 directions. You won't feel the same internal negotiation. You won't feel the need to prove why you didn't bend, because you already did what most never do. You passed when it counted. You passed when nobody would have known. You passed when it cost you comfort. And that's why this phase is complete. What comes next doesn't require belief. It requires consistency, and you've already shown that. So here's the ritual. Write 777 inches the comments if you recognize this moment, not emotionally, but internally. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel exists for confirmations, not noise. Share this with someone who needs proof that restraint doesn't go unnoticed, even when it's quiet. And click the next video now, not later, not when you feel ready, because what you unlock doesn't slow down. This wasn't the end of temptation. This was the end of debate. And from here on, you don't resist. You proceed.